I want you to picture the stereotypical top salesperson in your head right now. Go ahead, conjure up that image.
We all have one, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Are you picturing someone with this innate, undeniable, natural talent? You know, the smooth talker who can just instantly command a room?
Or maybe you're picturing an absolute social media powerhouse.
Right. Someone who dominates your feed with viral posts and massive engagement. Because we are constantly told that this is what success looks like in the modern business-to-business world.
We hear it constantly.
But what if the actual hard data says that those specific traits don't matter at all when it comes to closing complex deals?
It really challenges a lot of our fundamental assumptions. I mean, when you look at how much capital and energy companies spend trying to recruit these specific profiles, it's staggering.
It is.
We have these deeply ingrained cultural myths about what makes a great seller. But the data reveals that the landscape has fundamentally shifted, and those old playbooks are actively failing teams.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are going to uncover what specifically drives business to business, or B2B, sales success today.
Real success, not just the hype.
Right. We're bypassing all the anecdotal advice to look at the actual science of modern selling. And to do this, we are pulling from an incredibly comprehensive 2024 study. It was published in the International Journal of Management, Accounting, and Economics.
It's a fantastic paper.
Yeah, the researchers, Mohammed Safari and Tahera Babazadeh, they set out to create a definitive framework for critical success factors in B2B sales performance.
And what makes this source particularly valuable is its methodology. It's a mixed method study. So they didn't just rely on one way of looking at the problem.
Which is so rare.
Exactly. First, they conducted a systematic review of existing literature, narrowing hundreds of documents down to 40 highly relevant, peer-reviewed articles. And these span from 1980 all the way up to 2022.
Wow, so we have a historical baseline of over 40 years of sales research.
Right. But then they took those findings and conducted real-world interviews with current industry experts to see what actually holds up in today's market.
Which is crucial because, B2B sales cycles involve procurement teams, legal departments, multi-year timelines. The stakes are completely different than standard retail or consumer sales.
Completely different.
Yet, the researchers noted that past studies just kind of lazily lumped B2C and B2B together, which led to wildly inaccurate assumptions about what actually closes a deal.
Yeah, the Safari and Babazadeh study managed to distill this massive, complex reality down into exactly 31 critical success factors, specifically for B2B sales.
31 factors.
Yep. And to make it digestible, they grouped these 31 factors into 4 main dimensions: individual, organizational, environmental, and customer levels.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start with the individual level because I think this is where we see the biggest divergence from the old school mentality.
It definitely is.
The data validated a very specific set of individual factors. Let me read the list here. It's compatibility, knowledge, customer orientation, expert experience, interpersonal ability, listening, extroversion, efficacy, and time planning.
It's a solid list.
It is, but reading through it, I have to play devil's advocate for a second. Extroversion is still on there?
I knew you'd catch that.
Right. Doesn't that imply that the old, aggressive, charismatic, closer archetype is still relevant?
It's a fair question, but if we connect this to the bigger picture, the definition of these traits in a B2B context is highly specific.
How so?
Well, extroversion here isn't about being the loudest person in the room or aggressively dominating a pitch. It's about stamina.
Stamina.
Yeah, the stamina to continuously initiate and sustain complex interactions across a dozen different stakeholders in a client's company over, say, a 9-month period. It's structural, not theatrical.
Oh, I see. So it's less about the performance and more about the endurance to keep the communication lines open? That actually reframes time planning, too. In modern B2B, time planning isn't just keeping a neat calendar or setting reminders to follow up. The study frames it almost as the mathematical allocation of resources.
Precisely. A B2B sales cycle requires knowing exactly when a multi-touch deal is stalling in a legal department and deciding whether to reallocate your personal energy to a warmer lead or dive into the bureaucracy.
It's a strategic driver of revenue.
Yes. And then you pair that with listening and customer orientation. In these complex environments, the salesperson isn't there to convince a buyer they have a problem.
Right. They already know they have a problem.
They are there to deeply understand a highly specific organizational problem and architect a custom solution.
We've all been in that pitch meeting where the vendors is intensely charismatic, cracking jokes, putting on a great show. But the second you ask them how their API integrates with your legacy software, they freeze.
That is the exact moment where expert experience and knowledge completely override sheer charm.
It's a perfect illustration. And it ties directly into another validated individual factor, compatibility.
Oh, compatibility is huge.
The source defines this as the ability of the seller to seamlessly mesh with the culture, the pacing, and the communication style of the buying organization.
It's the ability to become a trusted internal consultant rather than just an external vendor pushing a product.
Because if your API doesn't integrate, you aren't compatible no matter how much they like you.
Exactly. But, the study makes it very clear that putting all the pressure on that individual seller is a massive mistake.
Which brings us to the organizational dimension.
Right.
The sources note that success isn't just resting on the shoulders of the individual reps. I mean, think about your own organization right now, listener. Are you relying entirely on your own skills, or is there a framework around you?
Organizations have to build that framework.
Yeah.
We're talking about things like clear goal setting, providing ongoing training, specifying ethical boundaries, and establishing reward systems that actually recognize creative ideas.
This raises an important question about how we view performance, doesn't it? We so often treat sales success as an individual sport.
We really do. If a rep fails, management blames the rep.
But the experts in this study highlight that B2B sales is a team sport played at the organizational level. Think about those reward systems you just mentioned.
The quota trap.
Yes, the quota trap. Let's say a rep has a complex 9-month deal on the table that will fundamentally revolutionize the client's business and bring in massive long-term revenue.
The huge win.
But their internal compensation plan only incentivizes closing tiny 1-month transactional deals. The rep's time planning skills are rendered completely useless because the organization is forcing them to optimize for the wrong targets.
Exactly. If leadership isn't providing the right structure, those individual traits fail. If there isn't rigorous, updated training, the rep's knowledge stagnates.
And if ethical boundaries aren't clearly specified, reps might make short-term promises that create long-term liability for the company.
The organizational support acts as the engine that allows those individual traits to actually function.
Which naturally brings us to the third dimension, the environmental factors. We spend so much time looking internally at our teams that we forget the external realities.
We do. The study points out that economic shifts, industry regulations, and competitor movements play a massive role in whether a deal closes.
And this is where that organizational support becomes critical again. An individual seller cannot control a sudden shift in federal compliance regulations or a massive tech downturn.
No, they can't. But a well-supported seller, backed by an organization that quickly pivots its training and updates its strategic goals to match the new environment, they can navigate that turbulence.
An unsupported seller just burns out trying to force an old strategy into a new economic reality.
That perfectly transitions into the fourth and final dimension, the customer level. This is something that gets entirely overlooked when we focus too much on the salesperson.
Right. The study highlights that the internal dynamics of the buying organization, things like buyer readiness, their internal procurement bureaucracy, and their general risk aversion, these are critical success factors.
It fundamentally changes the required approach. In B2B, you are almost never dealing with a single decision maker. You are dealing with a buying center.
Yeah, you might have a champion who loves your product, but they still have to get approval from a CFO who is heavily risk averse and a security team that requires exhaustive compliance audits.
So the salesperson's success is directly tied to their ability to navigate the customer's internal politics and bureaucracy.
If the customer organization is highly fragmented and disorganized, the salesperson has to essentially project manage the buyer's own procurement process for them.
That is the reality of modern B2B sales. The customer's environment dictates the seller's strategy. If you don't account for the customer in environmental dimensions, you're just operating in a vacuum.
We've seen that organizations need to support these specific learned behaviors and adapt to these environments. But the reason so many fail to do this is because they are still actively funding and focusing on the wrong things.
The old myths.
Exactly. The study completely dismantled some massive long-standing beliefs. Here's where it gets really interesting.
I love this part of the data.
We are talking about 7 specific factors that past academic literature basically swore were essential to sales success. But when put to the test with modern B2B industry experts, They were universally thrown out.
Let's hit the biggest one first. Myth number 1, natural talent.
This is a fascinating pivot in the literature. The study points back to 1985, specifically the famous research by Churchill and his colleagues.
Churchill claimed that innate natural talent was a major primary determinant of sales performance.
And for decades, companies have been trying to hire for this abstract idea of talent. But this 2024 study reveals that in modern B2B sales, talent simply does not play a statistically significant role.
It's entirely about learned skills.
Now, wait, I have to push back on that. Surely someone with natural magnetic charisma has an easier time getting a foot in the door with a gatekeeper. How can the data say talent doesn't play a role at all?
It's about where the weight of the decision ultimately lies. When you are selling a relatively simple product in a transactional environment, maybe you're knocking on doors selling vacuums in the 1980s, sheer charisma and natural persuasive talent might carry the day.
Because the buyer makes an emotional decision on the spot.
Right. But the data shows that in modern B2B, the complexity completely strips away the effectiveness of mere charm. You cannot charm a risk-averse procurement committee that is evaluating a multi-million-dollar software integration over a 9-month period.
Because they have spreadsheets, compliance checklists, and ROI calculators that literally do not care about your magnetic personality.
Precisely. They are mitigating risk. Success relies on the learned skills and the systems we just talked about. Time planning, deep technical knowledge, customer orientation.
A naturally talented person who lacks these systems will lose every time to a meticulously organized, highly knowledgeable seller who systematically addresses the buyer's risk.
Talent is a myth. Execution and learned competence are the reality.
Which is actually great news for you, the listener. You can't teach innate talent, but you can definitely train your team on time planning and active listening skills.
Absolutely.
Okay, myth number 2. And I have to admit, this one surprised me. Social media and internet use.
This is a big one.
The paper points to very recent studies, like research by Atani and Terho from just 2022, which argued that social media use by salespeople is absolutely critical to performance.
And that research drove a lot of the current corporate behavior we see today.
Right. We see companies spending fortunes training their sales reps to be thought leaders on LinkedIn, mandating that they post constantly to build their personal brand.
But the industry experts in this 2024 study universally rejected social media as a significant critical success factor for B2B sales. It didn't make the cut.
But again, I have to ask, everyone is on LinkedIn. How is it not a factor?
What's fascinating here is the distinction between marketing and sales execution. Social media might be a viable top-of-funnel marketing tool for general brand awareness.
Okay, sure.
But when we are talking about the critical factors that actually progress and close complex deals, the experts are saying it simply doesn't move the needle. Think about the high stakes involved. If a procurement manager makes a bad call on a vendor, it could cost them their job or damage their company's supply chain.
When the stakes are that high, a vendor's witty posts or their follower count are functionally irrelevant.
Exactly. B2B buyers care about direct, demonstrable competence. They care about your expert experience and whether your organizational structure can deliver on your promises. A viral post does not mitigate the buyer's operational risk.
Time spent agonizing over a personal brand is time not spent researching a specific prospect's internal business mechanics.
And that is a crucial insight for any sales manager currently demanding their team post 3 times a week. Stop funding the illusion of work and focus on the mechanics of the deal.
Let's run through a couple more of these rejected myths because they require a bit of context. Myth number 3 bundles a few behavioral and management theories together. For instance, conscientiousness.
This one requires us to look back at how psychological traits were applied to business.
Right. A researcher named Yang championed this back in 2011. The theory was that screening hires for the abstract psychological trait of conscientiousness, meaning they're highly disciplined, organized, and achievement-oriented by nature, was a critical driver of success.
But the 2024 experts toss it out.
And the reason is likely similar to the talent myth, right?
Yes. Having a conscientious personality is fine, but it is insufficient without the specific applied skills of B2B sales, like customer orientation and the organizational support to back it up.
You can be highly conscientious, but if your company doesn't provide technical training, you still won't close the deal.
Exactly. And even more surprisingly, the study debunked the grand debate over leadership styles.
Oh, this is a fun one. For years, management books swore by charismatic leadership the idea that a manager needs to be an inspiring visionary to drive their sales team.
This is something researcher Krauss wrote heavily about in 2015.
contrasting it with transactional leadership, which is more about routine management and clear rewards. But the modern experts failed to agree that a specific leadership style is a critical factor for B2B sales success.
This is where I strongly encourage you, the listener, to actively question those long-held corporate assumptions. We spend millions on seminars trying to transform managers into charismatic leaders.
When maybe we shouldn't be.
Right. Because this research suggests that in the trenches of modern B2B sales, the specific flavor of a manager's charisma matters far less than the structural support they provide.
A transactional manager who provides clear goals, ethical boundaries, and effective reward systems will vastly outperform a highly charismatic visionary who leaves their team to fend for themselves in a complex procurement process.
It's all about stripping away the fluff. We have this massive 31-factor framework. We know what works. Deep listening, compatibility, navigating customer bureaucracy, and providing organizational support.
And we know what doesn't work. Relying on natural talent, stressing over social media presence, or debating charismatic leadership. So what does this all mean? How can a listener actually take this and use it tomorrow morning?
The beauty of a framework like this is that it acts as a diagnostic tool. The study explicitly recommends that sales forces should use these factors for benchmarking and gap analysis.
You don't just look at these 31 factors and nod your head.
No, you actively compare your team's results and behaviors against the best sellers, the top performers in your specific industry.
So you map it out. If your top performers are excelling, map their behaviors against this framework. Are they displaying high expert experience and time planning? Great. Now look at the middle of the pack.
Exactly. Where is the gap? Is the gap at the individual level? Maybe they lack the technical knowledge to navigate the customer's IT department?
Or is the organization failing to provide the specific training needed to close that gap?
You use the framework to isolate the exact point of failure.
The sources also dive into the practical realities of timing and targeting. If time planning is a critical individual success factor, the advice for salespeople is brutally simple but hard to execute. You must focus on doing the best and most important work at the best time.
And you must hyper-focus on potential customers. Stop wasting time on activities that don't map to these 31 proven factors.
If social media isn't a critical success factor for closing a deal, but targeting a highly qualified potential customer based on their environmental readiness is, your calendar needs to reflect that reality.
That requires immense discipline. And there is a crucial piece of management advice buried in the text regarding how we actually measure that discipline.
Oh, this is vital.
When evaluating whether these critical success factors are present, the experts warn organizations against relying solely on formal, official evaluations.
Like the classic annual performance review or those rigid KPI dashboards that only track call volume and closed revenue.
Exactly.
I have to push back here, though. If we don't use the formal CRM dashboards, how do we actually do informal evaluations without slipping into toxic micromanagement? Nobody wants a manager breathing down their neck on every single call.
It's a delicate balance, but it comes down to what you are looking for. Those formal systems often only capture the lagging indicators, the final numbers at the end of the quarter.
Right.
But if you want to understand if your team is truly exhibiting customer orientation or effective interpersonal ability, you cannot rely on a spreadsheet. You use informal evaluations to observe the process, not just the outcome.
So it's about joining the complex strategy meetings or conducting postmortems on lost deals to see where the compatibility broke down.
Precisely. Managers need to be listening in to understand if the rep is architecting a solution or just aggressively pitching a product. You measure compatibility with a client through informal observation and active coaching.
It requires leaders to actually be in the trenches with their teams, observing the mechanics of the sale, rather than just reviewing data after the fact.
It's a fundamental shift from being a scorekeeper to being a coach.
Let's do a quick recap of the journey we've taken today. We started by challenging the stereotypical image of a salesperson, the charismatic closer, or the LinkedIn influencer.
We threw those out pretty quickly.
We did. Thanks to the comprehensive Safari and Babazada study, we now have a concrete 31-factor framework custom-tailored for the incredible complexity of the modern B2B world.
We know that success is built on individual systems, like mathematical time planning and deep listening.
It requires an organizational structure that provides clear goals and ethical boundaries. And it requires the agility to navigate shifting environmental regulations and the customer's own internal bureaucracy.
And my final word of advice on this is about resource allocation. As a professional, your energy is limited. As an organization, your capital is limited.
Very true.
Focusing on these proven critical factors is essential so that those precious resources aren't wasted on things that simply do not move the needle. Stop trying to hire for an invisible, unquantifiable trait like talent.
Stop mandating social media quotas that don't mitigate buyer risk. Build the systems, provide the training, and support the right behaviors. I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something to explore on your own as you digest all this. We now know that modern B2B success relies heavily on deep experience, active listening, and rigorous organizational support.
And we know it completely rejects the myths of natural talent and social media hype.
So ask yourself, if the data clearly proves that organizational structure and targeted training are the true drivers of complex sales, why do so many companies still build their entire compensation models around punishing the individual? Are we still structurally treating B2B sales like a solo sport, even when the science proves it requires a whole team to win?
It's a question every sales leader needs to answer.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take these 31 factors, use them to run a realistic gap analysis on your own work, and go apply these findings to your next big project or meeting. We'll catch you next.